Welcome to the Writer's Den. My name is Jane Waters Thomas, and today is an honor to interview our next guest. His name is S.L. Frisbee, and he is a fourth-generation publisher right here in Polk County. Welcome, S.L.
Thank you very much, Jane. I've been looking forward to the interview.
S.L., I got a copy of your book, Frisbee's Laws, 20 Surefire Rules for Successful Management, and just sort of kind of a fun afternoon, a friend dropped it on my desk and said, Jane, you got to see this book. And I started reading through it and I thought, this is awesome. Every new manager on the planet needs a copy of this book. Tell me what inspired you to write that book.
Okay, it's a rather interesting story. One day I was talking to my wife and also as my business partner. I said, Mary, I wish I had the nerve to tell the next person on the staff, and it didn't happen often, but every now and then somebody would say, that's not my job. And I said, I wish I had the nerve next time somebody said that to say, anybody who takes the attitude, that's not my job, does so at the peril of finding new and deeper meaning in those words. So she said, well, why don't you? I said, can I tell them that? And she says, yes, you can, you're the boss. I said, oh, I never really thought of it that way. So from that came the idea of Frisbee's Laws, not the book. It was a single sheet of paper, 8.5 by 11 double-spaced, and I figured I really owed it to our staff and particularly to our supervisors to give them my thoughts on how I would like our company to be managed. Frisbee Publishing Company, we publish 4 newspapers here in Polk County, and so I jotted down what I felt were the 10 most important things about how I would like for our company to be managed. I had learned that in only 20 years. So I basically learned one thing every 2 years. Over the next 20 years, I came up with 10 more. So in 40 years, I learned 20 things about managing a business. And when Mary and I sold the company, we turned over a whole bunch of paperwork, of course, to the buyers, including a copy of Frisbee's Laws. And the president of the company apparently liked it because I started hearing from other top-level managers in the company said, hey, I got a copy of Frisbee's Laws. I was really impressed. And so I mentioned this to my good friend Bo Rawlinson, who owns Bartow Christian Books and Gifts here in Bartow. He said, that sounds like a book to me. I said, oh? He said, yeah, a book like that sells for $14.95. That was a total business plan for Frisbee's Laws. So
outstanding.
I had a lot of fun with it. I felt like I had something to tell, hopefully in an entertaining way, hopefully that would be helpful to people so that they could learn what I had learned in 40 years and they could learn it in 45 minutes flipping through a book.
Now you mentioned 40 years. That's quite some time to come up with 20 laws that are surefire. But you know, as I was reading through some of your information, you actually began your career at 12 years old in 1953, working in your family's publishing company, just delivering paper. So this book must have been written based on a lot of lifetime experience.
Yes, it did. Incidentally, I prefer to think of that as a junior executive position in newspaper management and delivery systems. But yes, we were commonly called a carrier boy. And so, yeah, I've spent basically my entire adult life, and some before I got to be an adult, in the newspaper business. I've spent 2 years in the active Army after I got out of, after I graduated from college. I'd already worked for 3 years at a daily newspaper, the Tallahassee Democrat, while I was in college. So this is basically what my career has been, and as you said in the introduction, I'm fourth generation of my family to work in the newspaper business, starting with my great-grandfather and grandfather who started the Polk County Democrat, or as I have sometimes said, until our daughter Peggy got a job as a school teacher at Bartow High School, nobody in the family had held a real job for 4 generations.
So it was all fun and writing?
Oh yes, sure.
Outstanding.
The book was all fun and writing. Every now and then part of what's in management isn't fun, but I enjoyed it.
Well, management is the real to get the product to the press and so that all the readers in Polk County have something to actually look at. Now, in your time publishing, and let's just use the Polk County Democrat, and I know that in college you were a reporter for the Tallahassee Democrat. Right. So what were some of your favorite stories to report on in the Polk County Democrat?
Well, gracious. I always enjoyed interviewing Charlie Smith, who was generally accepted to be the oldest person living in America, a former slave, and although not everybody believed that he was as old as he said he was, he obviously did, and made a lot of interesting stories, had a lot of interesting stories to tell.
You know, and again, just kind of reading through some of it, because your biography is extensive. It's a long line of a lot of accomplishment. And one of the things that stuck out to me was your time served in military, and that not only as a second lieutenant after graduating college did you go in and serve, that once you actually came out, you then served again in, I believe it was the Coast Guard.
The Florida National Guard.
Florida National Guard, okay. And so tell me about your experience. If writing is a passion, if publishing is a passion, what are you doing in that respect while you're serving our country?
Very simple. Military Selective Service Act, commonly known as a draft. I graduated from college in 1962, and every young man had an obligation of 6 years of military service, could be served in a combination of active and reserve duty. And knowing this, I went through ROTC to get commissioned, and went in to on active duty for 2 years in Washington, D.C., came out, went into the Florida National Guard, having no thought of spending more than my 4 years of Guard and Reserve service. I was mistaken about that. 30 years later, I retired from the Florida National Guard. It was a career which I enjoyed very much, and it was a career which gave me some variety to the newspaper business.
I would think so, and I would think that particular experience would enhance, to some degree, the work that you did in the newspaper.
Probably so. In particular, from the management side, being an officer in the Army and any of its various permutations certainly involves management and leadership, and so I was able to draw from each of my two careers to help me in the other one.
So now, going back to your book, our 20 surefire ways to make management real in the workplace today, what are some of your favorite rules? Well,
the most important one, and it's also the most difficult one, and I acknowledge it is absolutely impossible to accomplish, is always do the right thing. My son, when he was a teenager, asked me to tell him, as his father, if I could give him one piece of advice, what would it be? Being a journalist, I didn't give him one piece of advice. I wrote him a 4-page letter. But it said, "And son, of all the things that I can tell you, the most important is always do the right thing."
Always do the right thing is something that, you know, and I wish that I knew who coined it, so I'm going to give it to you. But, you know, always do the right thing. That is the rule in management. And watching our younger generation come up out of high school and as they move into college, sometimes that's a difficult philosophy to push just in school, much less in the workplace. Now, how many people did you have working for you when you finally said, "I'm going to sell this business and write a bestseller book"?
Okay, probably around 30 journalists in Bartow, Lake Wales, and Fort Meade, and several newspaper carriers who are, of course, by definition, part-time.
Well, you know, talking to some of the journalists that I know, and some that we've even interviewed here, when I say S.L. Frisbee, they instantly know who you are, and it's with a big smile on their face and with high regard. In teaching your 20 rules over your 40-year period of time, they definitely hear and heard what that message was. So is there another rule within the book that just kind of sticks out to you?
Yes. The second most important one is the customer is king. If we take care of the king will take care of us.
Seems simple.
Seems simple enough, and it's fairly easy to do when the king is in a good mood. But when the king is mad because he got a wet newspaper or his son got arrested and we had the temerity to publish that fact, or any number of other things that can make the king unhappy, we still have to remember that the fact that he is unhappy or angry does not give us the right to respond in kind, and in fact it places on us, in my opinion, the obligation to respond in such a way that we try to make him at least not happy, at least to go away thinking that he's been heard and that he's been treated fairly.
Absolutely. Customer service at its highest, and that is a difficult thing when you, as a publisher of newspaper and of media, really have an obligation to print just truth, regardless of what that truth is sometimes.
This is quite true. Yeah, taking care of the customer does not mean always making the customer happy. we would make the customer happy by printing a picture of his son in 4 columns wide on the front page when he got his first home run in Little League Baseball. But unfortunately, that is not particularly feasible, and there is bad news, and if we ignore the bad news, we're not doing our job. Similarly, there's a lot more good news than there is bad news, and if we ignore the vastly greater amount of good news, once again, we're not doing our job.
You know, that brings up just a really good point about, you know, often I hear, you know, there's just no good news printed anymore. It's all bad news. And what are your feelings on some of those kind of comments? I have really heard them surface greatly as mass media and internet marketing, social media. Those different avenues have become available, and we are just inundated with everything that's happening everywhere all the time. What would be your statement to there's just no good news?
I would say that there is a lot of good news in the newspapers and in the other media, television in particular, but it is not what people really look to a newspaper or television for. If 500 kids go to a school and all of them are well behaved and act like little cherubs and get there on time and get their homework done, unfortunately there's not a whole lot of news in that. Actually, there might be if 500 all got it right at the same time. But it's the kid who goes berserk and takes a gun to campus who makes the news, and the good news behind that is that it happens so seldom that it is news.
Yes.
Also, I can tell you as a practical matter, the public, no matter how much they may lament the fact that there's no good news in the newspapers or on television, it's the bad news that sells.
Yeah, and you know, and I have to say that just because I read everything that comes across in the way of media, just from involvement in community more than anything, you know, in the press, meaning in hard copy press, in the newspaper, I'm seeing more and more good news printed. I'm not seeing so much hard and fast horrible news, and you know, front covers are of course national news, but little side columns that provide that ray of hope that there's good in the world. I see those things happening. Tell me the difference between the reporter that their entire job is to go find the crazy news, the bad news, and the difference between that reporter and the reporter who just gets to write the cool stuff. Just, you know, that kid was a rock star at school. What's the difference in those two reporters from a management position?
Oh, interesting question. Most reporters on a newspaper are assigned to cover a beat. Schools, school boards, city commission, county commission, sports. Chances are the person that you're describing who can go out and wander around and find interesting stuff is more likely to be a columnist whose job it is not to find the hard news of what's going on in the community at large, but to find some bright side. In my column that I just wrote for our next issue, I wrote on attending an historical program at the Bartow Public Library, and one of the people in the audience asked, was there anybody there who could remember when a very large, very dead, very smelly whale came to Bartow and as a tourist attraction? To make a long story short, the Polk County History Center found both an advertisement and a story, and this happened back in 1933. And I had fun writing about that. Now, it's not quite the same as writing about the success story of a child who succeeds against all odds, or a sick person who makes a miraculous recovery. But that type of story generally falls to the columnist. Frankly, beat reporters are pretty much totally consumed in what they're writing about. Police beat is another very obvious one. Some reporters and some newspapers do call on reporters to write a column from time to time. I did in my years at the Democrat, and still do in retirement. But typically, the beat reporters don't have the time for that. On larger papers where you can afford the luxury of one or more feature reporters, then their job is to go out and find things like that are going on. The arts and cultural programs in the high school, for example, or in the community.
You know, it seems like in the Polk County region we have so many fun things happening. There's a different event in every town every weekend. You know, there's art, there's culture, there's a lot of youth programming going on. Now, the publication, your publication, 4 different newspapers are covered within that publication. Is that correct?
Our company had 4 different newspapers. We had community newspapers in Bartow, Lake Wales, and Fort Meade, and then a 4th one, what's called a niche publication, which was published for our special audience of Polk County employees working in Bartow.
So what would be one of the Frisbee rules for management of multiple things going on under an umbrella?
Try not to go crazy. That's a good question, and there is no simple answer for it. We started as one newspaper, the one Polk County Democrat in Bartow, and then we added a Fort Meade newspaper and eventually established it as a separate product. And then we had printed the Lake Wales News for a number of years, and when the owner had a stroke, his 3 adult daughters came to me and asked would I help them manage the newspaper until Mama decided what to do with it, and I said, yes, I will, and when Mama decides, I hope she'll give us first refusal. And the 4th one was Polk County Times, a pattern on the idea of Army Times, Air Force Times, Federal Times. It was a niche publication for employees of county government, geared specifically at those thousands of people who work in Bartow but who live somewhere else in Polk County.
So now your publication really targeted a specific region then?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's to me the secret to success of the community newspaper business is that we don't try to be something that we're not. We don't try to be a little Tampa Tribune or a little Miami Herald or a little Washington daily newspaper. We focus on our audience, which is the people in our community, and we try to give as thorough coverage as we can. And this is where good news comes in. Most of the folks in our communities are good people doing good things. And so we are targeting that audience. That's the audience that we serve. That's the audience that we report on. We don't report on what's going on in Tallahassee or in Washington or in Germany or in France or in Belgium or any of the many other places where headlines are being created overseas. Our niche, our place in the marketplace is the community in which we publish. And the success, in my opinion, and the prospect for continuing success of the community newspapers lies in the fact that we don't try to be a little New York Times, a little Tampa Tribune. We are the community newspaper. We try to do the best job we can, and similarly, the big metro papers cannot devote the amount of time and space and other resources to give in-depth coverage in every town in America of 5 or 10 or 15 or 20,000 population.
And that brings me to another question, and really I think maybe more a statement that one of the things that I think is so wonderful about publications that really just target a region, and that's the region they work within. That population is who they seem to serve. It can be a little more in depth. It can be a greater coverage than a New York Times something about the same region where you get a blurb and you're a splash, and then as you just mentioned, Germany takes over and there's something happening there. I would imagine that through the publication that in building your 20 rules, some of those 20 rules had to come from dealing with very interesting people, not only under your management, but maybe under their management as well.
Yes, there's certainly some merit in that. I am, and I think probably most journalists and many others among us are people watchers. I genuinely like people. I take an interest in who they are and in what they do. And as a manager, you best be advised to take a lot of interest in what's important to your employees. But in the newspaper business, it's the same principle. Our market is all the people in the communities that we serve, and so we are well advised to pay close attention to what's important to them and to report on particularly the good stuff. There's a lot of good stuff going on in any community.
Well, you know, we have covered a ton of history and where you've started SL to kind of your retirement and to the book that you've written. Let's talk a little more about your book. Let's talk about who you hope to put this book in the hands of and what you hope their reaction will be.
Okay. Well, I guess the simple answer is I'd hope to put it in the hands of 1,000 people, because that's how many copies I had printed, and I'm happy to report that we still have something like 830 copies left. So there are a number of people out there who have not had the privilege. It was geared probably primarily to young managers. My thought was, hey, it took me 40 years to learn 20 basics, and there is no rocket science in here. There's nothing in there that you look at and say, oh, wow, that's really profound. It's the idea that here is something that took me a lot of time to learn, and managers, and in particular young managers and folks who hope to become managers, could say, hey, you know, if I can master these, or more to the point, with experienced managers, gee, I practice 17 of these 20 laws on a daily basis in my business, but I never thought about these other 3. You know, there's some merit in there. So it was a matter that I had spent 40 years learning this, and I thought, gee, I'd like to leave this around for somebody else to enjoy. So that's the market that I'm looking for. I had, if not delusions, I at least entertained the idea that this might catch on like the 1 Minute Manager, which was so popular a number of years ago. It didn't. I never really expected it to, and in fact, one of the, if I ever were to propound a 21st law, it would be this: if you want to write a book, write a book. If you want to get rich, buy a lottery ticket. Your chances of winning the lottery are a lot better than getting rich writing a book.
That's right. That's funny. But you know what? I have to tell you, as I mentioned, the book was given to me as a gift, and I read through it. It's a great fast read. It's something that you go, yeah, and it's exactly as you just mentioned. Yeah, I do that one. Maybe I could do that one a little bit better. I've never done that. I should probably do that. And got through. And I literally went to my computer and real quickly did all of the rules so that I had them, and then saw my son, who is in college, the next weekend, and I handed him the book, and it's, you know, the spine's a little bent from reading it and me trying to type in these rules, and I gave him a printout of the rules and a copy of the book, and I said, read the book and then pass it on to the next person who needs it. And so at this point, we know the book has been passed to at least 3 of his dorm mates, and the book is out and moving around, but it's just really great practical sense, what we would think would be practical sense. Some of it we overlook in our busy lives today. Rules to just treating people well and managing what's in your lane. You know, a popular term today is stay in your lane, meaning don't try to do SL Frisbee's job. Your job is to report on baseball, you know, and to stay in that lane. And he has mentioned many times, you know, working on rule number whatever, and I laugh at him, and you know, we hang the phone up, and I'm like, yes, it's working. That's working. So it's out there and it's moving for sure.
Well, that is a very high compliment. Thank you, Jane.
Absolutely. So SL, if somebody wanted to get a copy of your book, or maybe they would want you to come and speak about not only your book, but your 40 years experience in publishing and watching this market change vastly in that time, how would they get in contact with you?
2 simplest ways. One is on my cell phone that all of us carry with us religiously, and the number is 513-0358. That's the local area code, 513-0358. And as they say, our operators are standing by. For people who were not able to memorize that number, I still have a retirement office at the Polk County Democrat here in Bartow, and you can contact me by calling the Democrat and leaving a message there, and I will definitely get back to you. I enjoy public speaking, and frankly, I enjoy selling books. And I make about as many speeches as I sell books. So it's a sort of a 50-50 arrangement.
So I have a final question for you. Do you do consulting? If somebody were to call and say, I would really like to know how to write a book, would you be willing to sit down with me and help me to figure this out? Is that something that you do?
I would not presume to call that consulting. If somebody asked me to talk to them about writing a book, I would be glad to talk to them about it. As far as some sort of professional advice, that frankly is where you go to a book publisher or a book printer, and there's a slight difference between self-publishing and having a book publisher handle it, and I did a little of both. I went to a woman who was a book publisher, but I then self-published. But she was the one who knew how to get it registered with the Library of Congress, and to help me through the technical aspect of it. Incidentally, there's a very simple difference between self-publishing and going through a publisher. And I'm not talking about the vanity press, so-called, and I'm not sure that that's such a bad idea. You want to write a book about your family and you know only 50 people are going to want it, that's perfectly fine. But what the woman who I was dealing with told me, she said, if I publish your book, I'm going to make 90% of the decisions and keep almost all of the money, and I will do a great deal of the work. She said, if you self-publish, I will print it for you. You will make all of the decisions and you will keep whatever money there is to be made for it. What she didn't mention was how little money that would be.
Right.
But no, I had a lot of fun writing a book. I was not the classic journalist who always wanted to have the great American novel that was inside me and wanted to come out. I wanted to tell somebody something about management and to have a little fun in the process.
Well, it definitely is a wonderful book, and it's a quick read, and it's a lot of fun to read, and there's some really good tips in there. So I definitely recommend it to anybody who is a manager. It's things you think you know that you forgot that you knew, kind of stuff, but really, really a great read. SL, thank you so much for joining us today on the Writer's Den. I hope that we'll see you back after you do your next fabulous book.
Thank you very much, Jane. I shall look forward to that also.
For more information on SL Frisbee and the Frisbee Laws, 20 Surefire Rules to Successful Management, you can contact him on the information located on your screen. Thank you so much for joining us at Writer's Den. We'll see you next time.